Hey guys, today I'm going to be changing one of my guides and I'm going to take you step by step on how I do that. So first of all, if you need a sharp razor blade, some Scotch tape, a mask to protect yourself when you're heating up the epoxy, a heat gun, and this is just some foam that I got to protect the blank. I'm going to put it on the outside right here just so when I had the heat gun on the guides, I'm focusing strictly where the epoxy is. So I'm gonna get set up and we get to it. Alright guys, so as you can see, I have the foam right here and I have a little piece of tape right here. And the reason I'm doing this is because when I'm heating the epoxy up with the heat gun, I want to protect the blank, alright? So you just want something to protect the areas that don't have epoxy on there. And another thing, when you're heating up the epoxy, you don't want to have the heat gun on there for too long. All it needs to do is just heat the epoxy up just a little bit to melt it, and then that's when you take the razor blade and you start cutting it away. Because if you have the heat gun on there too long, it will crack the blank, and that's the last thing you want. So let's start doing it now. Now I think I heated it up enough, so now let's take the razor blade and start cutting. Look at that, it's cutting real easily. You see how it's coming off like that? That's what you want, for it to just come off that easy. And now I'm going to do that to both sides, and then we're going to take this guide off. So stay tuned. Make sure when you're doing this, you have a sharp razor blade. So guys, this is what it looks like after you get the guide off. So what we're going to do now is take some sandpaper and sandpaper this area down to get the rest of the wrapping and the glue off, or the epoxy off. So when we're putting the guide back on there, it's a smooth transition. So let's do that now. So guys, what I'm gonna do next is take this sandpaper and try to get the rest of the epoxy and the thread that's on here. So when I'm rewrapping the guide, it's nice and smooth. So this is 220 grit sandpaper. So what I'm gonna do is dab it on there and just spin it around and do that, and try to get as much of the epoxy and thread off as I can. And remember, you want this nice and smooth. See, it's already starting to come off. So that's what I want to do to both sides. So I'm gonna do it and then I'll show you guys how it turns out. So guys, this is how it looks right now after I sandpapered it down a little bit. You see how it's starting to get a lot of the epoxy and thread off? That's what you want to do for both sides. Then after that, we can wipe it down and then we can start rewrapping. So I'll show you guys the finishing product. So guys, I just got done sanding it down, and just be careful because the sandpaper that I use will take the paint off that's originally on the rod. So you just got to be careful when you're sanding this area down. You don't want to go too much up, because if you do, you'll have to wrap more than you need to. So try to keep it in the same range as where your guides were previously. So we're done with this. Now I'm going to show you guys how I wrap it. So hey guys, I'm going to go over what you need to wrap the guide. So you're going to need your guide. You're going to need some thread. The size that I use is D. You need Scotch tape, razor blade, and you're going to need 2 of these stands to hold your rod up. And you're going to need one of these wrappers. I bought this at MUDHOLE. This is an older version, but now they've upgraded these and they have better ones. So guys, this is what you need to do when you're wrapping the guide. I'm showing you this picture because I doubt my camera will be able to show you exactly what I'm doing. So I'm showing you this picture, and it takes you step by step on what you need to do. So now let's start doing the wrap. So hey guys, now what I'm going to do is put the guide in place with this tape. And like the picture shows, this tape is just holding it right here. So when I start wrapping, it'll hold it in place. And then once I get to a good spot, then I'll take the tape off and then continue the wrap. So now let's do the other side. And just to be clear, the reason this is 2 different colors is because of the sandpaper I was using to get the rest of the epoxy and the wrap off. But what I'm going to do to cover this is start the wrap right here and then finish right here, and that should cover all this area, and then you'll never know. So I'm gonna put some tape right here. And when you're about to wrap this guide, make sure that this guide is in line with the rest of the guides, because you don't want to have a crooked guide, obviously, when you're fishing. And again, I'm doing exactly this, okay? So just study this picture and you should be able to do it. So another thing to remember is when you're wrapping a guide is you see this green line right here? You need this. Obviously, it doesn't have to be green, but you just need some type of line to put through the strings. And what I usually use is the thread that I wrap with. I just cut a separate piece off and I just use that. So what you guys do is you put the thread through here, and then you take it right here, you put it through here, and then you take it right here, and then we can start wrapping. And remember, I'm gonna start right here to cover this area up. Then once you get going, all you have to do is just spin this, and that's it. And when you're spinning it, just make sure that there's no gaps right here. And also, if there's too much slack right here, all you have to do is just tighten this part right here. And once you do that, this should be coming off tighter. And all you have to do is just keep spinning it. So let's do it. Now we're gonna cut this part and keep wrapping. So guys, we're coming up to the area when you're gonna start wrapping the guide. It might be a little hard to get the thread to go up this little slope, but if you keep trying, you'll eventually get it. So let's do it now. So guys, as you can see, I already had the guide going up. So when I get to right here, I'm going to take the tape off and then continue to wrap up into this point. So let's do it now. So guys, now I'm going to take this tape off, and then I'm going to wrap up to here. Alright guys, as you can see, the wrap is coming out really nice, and I'm actually covering that whole entire area where I sandpaper. So now what we're going to do is put a string right here and then wrap that string. And the reason I'm doing this, because if you remember that picture I showed you earlier, we're at this part right here, and you need to do this part in order for the wrap to stay. So let's do this now. So here's my string right here. I'm going to put it under like that with the loop facing this way, and then I'm going to wrap it all the way up to right here, cut this part off, put the end of it through here, pull this part, and then cut it off right here. And what that's going to do is hold the whole wrap in place, like I showed you previously on the picture. So let's do it now. So what I'm going to do now is cut that. Make sure you hold this. When you cut it from the bottom, and make sure you hold this, because your wrap might get loose, and you need to put tension on this at all time in order for the wrap to stay. So what I'm going to do now is take this end and put it through the hole, just like that. Place one hand on here so you can keep the tension. And then I'm going to pull this in, just like that. And it's going to pull this part from here. So I'm going to show you now. There you go. And now all you have to do is take a razor blade and cut as close to this as you can. And there you go. And that's how you wrap a guide. So now we're going to do this end, and then after that we're going to put some epoxy on there and then let it dry for 24 hours, and then we're done. So I'm going to do this side now, and then I'll show you guys how I put epoxy on this. So stay tuned. Hey guys, so some word of advice is when you're actually starting to wrap a guide, do not wrap it too tight because there is potential for the rod snapping. I have done that before. When I first started building rods, I wrapped the guide too tight, and then one time I went fishing and my rod snapped. And also another thing, say after you wrap the guide and it is a little crooked compared to your other guides, you should be able to move this guide a little bit. If you can't move it at all, then that's probably a good indicator that you wrapped it too tight. So now we're done wrapping the guide, and then let's go out there and put some epoxy. So guys, we're at the last step of putting a new guide on your fishing rod. So I'm gonna show you guys what you're gonna need. You're gonna need a mask, and this is so you're not inhaling the fumes from the epoxy. You're gonna need a lighter. You're gonna need a stand, a rod dryer, some epoxy, the syringes that usually come with the epoxy. Need a little epoxy cup, an alcohol burner, and a brush. So I'll explain each step while I'm doing it. So let's get to it. And also guys, this thing right here is called a tent. This is just to put over the rod to protect it from dust and particles like that. You don't need it, but it's just something that's good to have just in case you're doing this outside like I am. So guys, what we're gonna do now is put the butt of the rod in the dryer. Might take a little force, but as soon as it goes in, you want to pull it out just a little bit. And also guys, a thing that you can do before you start putting epoxy on, if you see any last minute dust or anything on your wrap, take some Scotch tape and just try to get it off, because that's the last thing you want, is when you have your epoxy on there and you see little particles. Alright guys, so I have my epoxy here. This is the 4-ounce kit that MUDHOLE sells, and what I'm going to do is put equal amounts of each. I'm going to use these syringes, and then I'm going to mix the epoxy with the end of this brush. So let's do it now. So take the top off. I'm going to put 2 milliliters of each. Now I'm going to do the same with the resin. And again, 2 milliliters. So now what I'm going to do is mix the epoxy slow. The reason I like to do it slow is because, in my opinion, it creates less air bubbles. And when you have less air bubbles in your epoxy, that decreases the time that you have to use the alcohol burner to get the air bubbles out. So I'm going to do this nice and slow. I usually like to do this for around 2-3 minutes. You can already see there's air bubbles starting to form in there, so I'm going to try to go a little slower. So guys, I'm done mixing the epoxy up. As you can see, there are some air bubbles in there, but I'm going to see if they're still there once I put the epoxy on the guide. Usually they'll come off, but if they don't, then you have to use the alcohol burner. So let's see how it looks when I start putting it on there. So now let's cut the dryer on. As you can see, the rod is starting to turn. So now let's put the epoxy on. So guys, when I'm putting the epoxy on the guide, all I'm doing is this. Just like that. You want to make sure you're getting all the nylon when you're putting it on here. Just like that. Make sure it's nice, even coats. And it's really that simple. So I'm going to do this side, and then we'll let the rod sit. So stay tuned. So as you can see guys, there's not that many air bubbles, if not any, in there. So I'm not going to worry about using the alcohol burner, but just for teaching wise, I'll show you guys how I use it if I did need to get the air bubbles out. So guys, this is an alcohol burner. They sell these at MUDHOLE. All you have to do is untwist the top, put alcohol in there, and then put a wick inside. And then, I don't know how long it usually takes, but usually, I like to wait a little while until the alcohol reaches the top, goes through the wick, reaches the top, and then that's when I take a lighter and just light the top, and then this will stay lit. So guys, once this is lit, all you're doing is putting it close enough to the epoxy where you can see the air bubbles start to burst. And you don't want it too close to the epoxy, because if the flame is too close, it will leave burn marks in your epoxy, and that's not gonna look right. I've done it plenty of times. So guys, now we're gonna put the tint over the whole length of the rod to prevent any dust or any bugs getting and drying in the epoxy. So let's do that now. So guys, now we have the tint over the rod. So now I'm gonna let it sit for 24 hours, and then I'll show you guys the finished product. Hey guys, so this is the finished product. It looks really well. So if you have any questions for me, please comment on the video. So please like, comment, subscribe, and fish on.